90 years ago, the Virginia Farm Bureau made our local farmers a promise to protect and preserve a way of life they worked so hard to establish. Today, our insurance agents work to protect all Virginians, not just farmers. We want to keep Virginia, Virginia. More information is at farmbureauadvantage.com.
The Remarkable Soybean. From its oil, we get products like ink, candles, and paint. From its meal, we get a high-protein fiber used in foods and animal feeds. Natural soy is replacing chemicals and products you use every day. You can learn more about soybeans at vasoybean.com.
We hear a lot these days about adding value to farm products. But how do grain farmers, specifically soybean growers, add value to their product? That's our focus during Ag Insights as we talk with Virginia farmer Craig Bailey. We also have a story about the importance of broadband internet in rural Virginia, plus how to keep deer out of your garden. Those stories and more on this episode of Virginia Farming. I'm Jeff Ishii. Virginia farmers are seeing pretty good field conditions as we roll into the month of April 2018. Some portions of the state experienced a dry winter, but things started to turn around during the month of February. Soil moisture is variable, of course, but for the most part, farmers should see adequate soil moisture as we start planting corn over the next few weeks. Planting activities are already underway on the eastern shore and will migrate westward through the south side and the Piedmont, ending with the Blue Ridge and Valley region in later April and May. Well, Virginia farmers need better access to high-speed broadband internet. That's according to a recent report from Virginia Farm Bureau and Sherry McKinney.
For many Virginians, logging onto the internet is still anything but point and click. According to a 2016 Virginia Chamber of Commerce study, only 55% of rural Virginians have access to high-speed broadband. That's a statistic that many leaders across the countryside say must change soon.
I think it's so critical across the board for education in particular. When you think about children that don't have equal access because they don't have internet access, it's hard for them to be competitive in the school system. It's hard for them. It affects them going on to college. It affects our health systems. And when you look at agriculture and forestry, the modern equipment really is it provides much more information, better data for a farmer, for forest landowners, for the forest products industry, to be able to do the right thing with the land.
Tad Dariso, the president and CEO of Mid-Atlantic Broadband in Charlotte County, has been working to expand broadband service for years.
When you look at the importance of, rural America and what that means to, the future of our country, that's a huge thing to have broadband access as part of that. And again, it's just level setting, right? We're not asking for special treatment. We're not asking to be any different. All we want is the same access. If you can get it in downtown Chicago, you should be able to get it in downtown Charlotte County.
This isn't the first time rural Americans have faced such a daunting economic issue. 90 years ago, lawmakers viewed the lack of electric power in rural areas as a national problem. The Rural Electrification Administration Act of 1936 expanded power lines through rural America with the help of federal loans and the creation of municipal utilities. During the 1930s, for-profit power companies became state-regulated monopolies to ensure universal access and affordable rates. Member-owned nonprofit electric co-ops also formed during this time to expand the electrification of rural America. Today, some policymakers argue that the federal government should view the shortage of broadband service in rural areas as a similar challenge. In today's global economy, high-speed internet forms an economic barrier between rural and urban Virginia. Not being able to cruise on the internet is much more of a problem than being unable to do a web search or watch online videos. It literally can halt economic growth for a region.
When we were created back in 2004, it was important because businesses would say, I'd love to come to Southern Virginia. I want to invest. I like your workforce. I like your taxes. But the internet costs are 10 times to 50 times more expensive. So when we were created, it was important to make sure that our localities here in rural Virginia had the same ability to access broadband as the major metros.
President Donald Trump signed 2 executive orders last January during the American Farm Bureau Federation's annual convention to give rural broadband a boost. The first order makes it easier for internet companies to build wireless broadband towers on government buildings and land. The second directs the Secretary of the Interior to develop a plan to support rural broadband development on properties managed by the Department of the Interior. These are small steps, and the USDA's Agriculture and Rural Prosperity Task Force says much more needs to be done.
We want to be competitive. We want to be open for business. Governor Northam wants to make sure that we're back as being the top state in the U.S. As far as business. And we need to have, it affects our workforce development. And we also want family members to be able to come back to those rural communities. It's really important as we transition farms, as we see that the demographics across the state. We have an aging population for our farmers and our forest landowners. And so some of them do have children that would love to be able to stay in that community if they could afford to do so.
Ring says expanding rural broadband access is truly a nonpartisan issue, and it will take the efforts of both private, industry, and government incentives to make it happen. In Charlotte County, I'm Sherry McKinney.
Thank you, Sherry, for that report. Virginia cattle producers know that sometimes the market situation, it just doesn't make any sense at all, as we hear in this report from the American Angus Association and Bob Severa.
Cattle prices go up, beef prices follow. Cattle prices go down, beef prices remain. A rancher might wonder, what gives?
A common question we get from cattlemen is they know the price of fed cattle that they're selling to the packer, and then they walk into a grocery store and see a price per pound that's significantly higher than the price they sold those fed cattle for. And we get that question sometimes of what's the disconnect?
Mark McCulley says, don't always assume retail price is driven off the price of goods. There is a cost for everything in between.
From the time we sell, say, $1.20 fed cattle to the time the packer is then processing those and the costs associated with all of that, to the pieces and parts that they sell on out through all the channels of distribution to retailers and then ultimately to the consumer.
Those steps create the great eating experience the consumer craves.
The best example is as we look at kind of how that $1.20 fed cattle can convert to something that as you walk into a grocery store and maybe find a $25 filet mignon.
A 1,400-pound steer produces a 900-pound carcass that only yields 14 pounds of tenderloin, just a few pounds that can command high dollars at the counter.
It represents less than 2% of the total weight of the carcass, but contributes, 7 to 8% of the total value.
That's important for cattlemen to keep in mind while they make genetic decisions about their herd and decide which traits to emphasize.
The demand signals are still really, really good. And as we've increased the quality of the herd, what we've seen is the packers' ability to have more high-quality product, more choice, more certified Angus beef brand, more prime to sell. It's allowed them to pay more for all fed cattle because of the rising tide, if you will, of quality and how that's sent a very strong signal back all the way through the system.
Premiums paid for quality remain strong. I'm Bob Cervera.
Thank you, Bob, for that report. Virginia farmers are always looking to add value to their products. This week, Amy Rocher visits with Craig Bailey of Greenmount Roasting. That report is coming up next during Ag Insights.
So today we're in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and we're visiting Greenmount Grain Roasting. I'm joined by owner Craig Bailey. Craig, thank you so much for having us out today.
It's very good to have you all here today.
So what exactly is grain roasting? This is new to me.
Actually, it's been around for at least 30 to 40 years. It's more common today than it was 30, 40 years ago. But basically, we heat treat grain, and it makes it more digestible, more nutritious for the animal. A lot of benefits besides the nutrition, as far as molds and toxin levels, we can reduce those. And also we can dry the crop at the same time. So we're getting a lot of things covered with one process. And
okay.
It's proven to be very profitable.
So how long have you been doing this?
This is our 13th, it's going on our 13th year. So
Okay.
we've been working at this since 2003.
All right. Well, the name of your company has grain roasting, and we've got a big pile of soybeans here behind us. Do you roast anything besides soybeans?
We primarily roast soybeans and corn. We do some barley and a little bit of wheat, and last year we did triticale.
Okay.
And these are grains that are harvested, you know, as a feed grain. So it's not a forage; it's actually a feed grain. So.
Okay. So, is this treated like silage?
No, silage has a lot of moisture.
A moisture.
And a grain has to be dry to be able to be stored properly.
That's what I was going to ask. How is it stored? So, is it just stored in bins?
Yeah, grain bins or like feed tanks, or some people decide to put them on a concrete floor and store them that way. So we typically, when a load comes in, we'll just dump it on the concrete and scoop it up and run it through our machine, and that works really well for our setup right now.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about your setup because you take this show on the road.
Yes, we basically can roast anywhere that is available for us to go, and we're 100% contained. We carry our own propane that powers the roaster, and we have a generator that powers all the equipment. So we can pretty much run a 8 to 10 hour day without any support.
Now, when you take the roaster out on the road, do you have to have special licensing to drive because you are carrying propane?
Yes, we have to carry a CDL license with a hazard material endorsement on our license. But it just makes the experience for the farmer so much more easier. There's nothing they have to worry about other than to get set up and to help us to do the job, and it makes it very enjoyable for the farmer and for ourselves.
Hey, anything you can do to make their job easier, right?
That's right.
So how many people do you employ with the roasting business?
Right now we have one full-time, and besides myself, and 3 or 4 part-time. Now the part-time come in at harvest. That's when we're the busiest. I mean, sometimes we run around the clock 24 hours. Just, you know, if especially with corn and there's a lot of crop coming off and it's high moisture, we want to get it dried down as quick as possible. And of course, with corn, your yields are always higher than with soybeans, so it takes longer to roast, an acre of corn. But you know, as far as the rest of the year, usually one person can pretty much handle the work that comes in each week, and and we're not busy every day, but it's very common to have 2 or 3 days a week tied up in roasting. So, but we also have trucking services and things like that. We can haul the grain for you, or if someone needs soybeans or roasted corn, we purchase it. We actually raise them on our farm here, but we will also purchase it, and that's what happened here. We purchased beans for another customer.
Okay.
And we'll roast it, we'll grind it and crimp it, or whatever the customer wants. It's a full service.
So when you say roast it or crimp it, are there different recipes that you kind of follow for different grains?
Well, in roasting, with soybeans, we try to typically run at 300 degrees. The internal temperature of the soybean is 300 degrees. On corn, we monitor the moisture level. When our moisture is down below 15, usually 14% is what we shoot for, then we know we're good. So there are different, each grain is a little different how we roast it.
Okay.
With barley, we try to get about a third of the kernels to crack, to pop open, and they'll sort of puff open.
So let me ask you, how on earth do you find out that the center of a soybean is at 300 degrees?
Okay, we have a can that we actually put a thermometer in, and we take can temperatures. And so we will do that periodically throughout the process. Typically, I've done this long enough, I can look at it, and I can tell by the machine, my gauges and everything, I can pretty much hit it pretty close.
Now, do the change in appearance at all after they're roasted? Do they get darker?
Actually, all the grain will actually swell up. It'll actually puff out. With soybeans, they'll get a little larger, and the skins on the outside will get a little darker. and they'll have, we have a flame roaster, which actually the beans actually fall through the direct flame 5 to 6 times before they leave the roaster. And so
Really?
you will have a little bit of a scorch mark, but for mold and toxins, we really like that better. The flame can actually burn that off. So we really like our process.
So someone can call and you can either go to them, but a lot of your business, they bring it to you. They bring their soybeans or corn, whatever.
I would say a small fraction brings it to me. Typically, it's people that have small quantities. At harvest, we have bins here that farmers will actually fill the bins up while we're out on the road roasting, and then we'll come back. A day that we're slower, we'll set up here at the farm and continue to roast their customers' grain.
Well, you mentioned, mold and moisture being reduced. So does that mean does roasted grain last longer? Can you store it for longer amounts of time?
Well, in order to store it for an extended period of time, it needs to be dry. And a lot of different grains have different moisture levels that they will keep at. Typically, the molds come from where somebody put the grain in the bin just a little bit too wet. Or they put it in the bin dry, but when they put air on it, it might have been a day that was damp and rainy or something, and they got moisture in the grain, and then it'll start to deteriorate. And there's different stages of molds and mycotoxins, and we can't eradicate it at 100%, but we can reduce it. And if it's caught in the early stage, we've done a lot of testing where we'll send samples off and there's no presence. But again, it depends on what stage that the grain is, the molds and things are in. So it's a lot of different variables there, and it's every year's a different thing, a different challenge, it seems like. So,
right. So if you roast an acre of corn, how long does that last? Does it have a fairly substantial shelf life, so you could actually roast earlier and not have, and all you need to do is worry about storing it at that point?
Well, typically, a year is about all you want to store any grain, and roasting does take care of the moisture, and I think it does extend the shelf, the life a little bit, but it still has to be treated as a feed grain. If you put it in a bin, you still need to take care of it. You need to keep an eye on it and put some air to it occasionally on a good dry day.
Okay.
Soybeans is not quite as critical, but corn is a little bit temperamental. So I would say if a farmer's going to roast and they store it in bins, they need to treat it as a normal feed grain.
Okay, right.
Whether it's roasted or not roasted. So
what feedback are you getting? Are dairy farmers getting more milk production when they use roasted grains?
Yeah, a lot of guys this year, soybean prices have dropped over the last 8 to 10 months. And a lot of guys that have never used soybeans before are using them now and saying they're very pleased. Their production has gone up, their feed costs have gone down because they raised the product from the farm. The old saying goes, a farmer has to buy retail and he sells wholesale and he pays freight both ways. So I tell farmers, if you're paying freight to haul your grain out and then you're bringing freight to bring something back in, that cost right there would have covered your roasting cost. So, it's all how you look at it. If you want to feed your own product, it's a great alternative. If you don't mind feeding other feed grains that maybe have seeds from somebody else's field that you don't have in your field, then you could have some issues there with weed control in your own croplands.
Sure.
So there's a lot of different variables. Now on corn, several people have several universities have done studies, and they're seen a 4 to 6 pound increase in milk production and a 2 to 4 pound decrease in corn going into the ration. So they're actually reducing their corn intake and they're increasing their milk production.
Wow.
And we typically see for every dollar that you spend, you're going to get $2 back. And
wow. That's pretty amazing.
It's a pretty good buy, we feel.
Now, do you work with anybody at Virginia Tech or VSU to help you? You know, you say you test things a lot and you're doing studies.
I do, like my testing, I just send them off to a lab that does the different tests.
Okay.
Now, as far as university studies, I'll work with a company in Pennsylvania that actually manufactures the equipment, and they are tied in with several universities and a vet school in Pennsylvania, and they've done a lot of in vitro tests where they do rumen degradation and all. So it's very extensive. Now, I've never done anything with Virginia Tech because I'm a smaller guy compared to the manufacturer that manufactures equipment, and their equipment goes worldwide, so they typically, take care of that end of it, the research and development, and they've done a very good job, at it, and they share their results with me and other people that have machines like we have.
Okay, all right. Well, if any of our viewers want more information on Green Mountain grain roasting, where should they go?
They can call me directly at area code 540-578-0760, or they can email us at greenmountgrainroasting@gmail.com, and they can just shoot me an email and we can respond. And we're not afraid to go anywhere. We travel 3 to 4 hours away.
As long as there's a path to get there, you can get there, right?
Right, exactly.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for having us out today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time to come visit.
We'll be right back.
We learn more about keeping deer out of your garden from the ground up with Chris Mullins.
Well, hi and welcome. Today we're at Fauquier Education Farm near Warrenton, Virginia, and we're here with Mr. Jim Hankins, the executive director here at the farm. Jim, I wanted to talk a little bit about deer. Deer are always bothering people's gardens, eating things up, and there's a lot of home remedies people use. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but I think you've got a better way to keep deer out of the garden.
Well, a 3D deer fence works really, really well. Most of those other techniques like putting hair around your garden or fox urine, they just don't work.
Right.
And if you are really counting on getting this stuff out of your garden, this area in particular, boy, we have a huge deer population. And going to that really high-cost 10-foot deer fence that they can't jump over, that can be really cost-prohibitive. This is called a 3D deer fence, and it works really well. And, for about $350, we have this little bit more than a half an acre fenced in.
Wow.
And the components, I could fence in a larger area if I wanted to.
Why do you call it a 3D deer fence? What does that mean?
Well, deer have a very different depth perception than we do.
Okay.
The essential part of a 3D deer fence is that you have two different sections. You have an outside strand.
Okay.
It's about 24 inches, and then you have about a 3-foot gap, and then you have two more strands, one at 24 inches, one at about 48 inches.
Okay.
A deer is perfectly capable of jumping over this, but it messes with their depth perception and they just won't jump over this.
I see.
It works really beautifully.
Okay.
I have sweet potatoes and green beans in here, which are just deer candy.
Right.
And they're not coming in here. Now, it is normally an electrified fence.
Right.
I have a solar charger.
Okay.
$100, $120, you can get it in any local feed store. Anybody could put this up. Looking up 3D deer fence, there are a lot of them on YouTube, the components of it. I put this particular fence up in one afternoon by myself, enclosing a large area. And it works really well.
And for more information about deer fencing and how to put it up and where to buy it, please contact your local county extension office and talk to a master gardener. For From the Ground Up, I'm Chris Mullins. We'll see you next time.
Our pearl of wisdom this week is, well, it's just as true now as it always was. It's no use closing the barn door after the horse is gone. Now that right there is a pearl of perfection. If you have a pearl of wisdom you'd like to share with us, you can do so through our website at virginiafarming.com. That does it for our show this week. Have a great week, everyone. I'm Jeff Ishii for Virginia Farming. And now your Ag Trivia question of the week. The answer when we return.
90 years ago, the Virginia Farm Bureau made our local farmers a promise to protect and preserve a way of life they work so hard to establish. We want to keep Virginia, Virginia. Anyone can be a Farm Bureau member, and there's a local Farm Bureau in every county. More information is at vafarmbureau.org.
Virginia soybean farmers are hard at work growing soybeans to produce products you use every day. Candles, soaps, even crayons can be made from soybeans. Remember, when you buy soy, you're helping to support American jobs, the economy, and our nation's energy security.
And now the answer to your Ag Trivia question of the week, D.